The road into Cedar Hollow was long and pale in the dusk, dust rising with every footstep as though the earth itself sought to cling to the living. Eliza Harper walked it with her head bowed, the weight of a satchel pressing against her shoulder, her worn boots leaving faint prints that the wind hurried to erase. She had been walking since morning, guided not by promise but by a quiet, stubborn will, the same will that had kept her alive through a year of widowhood, debt she could not pay, and whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. There was no home left to her, no kin willing to take her in. Only the thought of a rancher on the edge of town, a man she had never spoken to, whose wife had died 3 winters ago and whose young daughter was said to live in a silence almost as lonely as his own. She would ask him for work, not charity, not pity, but a chance to cook, to keep his house, to make herself useful. It was the last ember of dignity she could hold. The house came into view as the sky bruised purple and gold. It stood plain and strong against the rising dark, the timbers darkened by weather, a single lamp flickering in the window, like a beacon no one was meant to follow. A corral stretched out to one side, its rails leaning with age, while the barn loomed behind, half swallowed in shadow. Eliza stopped at the gate, breathing hard, smoothing her skirts with hands that would not steady. She felt the familiar sting of shame, that she, once a wife with a home, now came as a beggar, but shame was a poor shelter against hunger. She pushed the gate open and walked the path to the porch. Caleb Boone opened the door before she could knock. He filled the frame like a tree that had weathered too many storms, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair black streaked with iron, his face carved with lines of sun and loss. His eyes, gray as old ash, looked at her with the suspicion of a man long used to fending for himself. Behind him, the faint shadow of a child moved, then stilled, watching. "I came to ask," Eliza said, her voice trembling but resolute, "if you might need someone to cook, to keep the house. I asked for little, just a roof and a chance of work." She clutched her satchel tighter, willing him to see not desperation, but worth. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't take in strangers. I've no need for help." His words were rough, not cruel, but they landed like stones all the same. He began to close the door, but the shadow behind him shifted, and a girl's face appeared in the crack. Wide eyes, pale cheeks, hair the color of wheat left to grow too long. Clara Boone, no more than 8 years old. She stared at Eliza with a gaze that seemed both timid and starved for something unnamed. Eliza lowered her eyes. "I understand," she murmured, turning back toward the road. The rejection cut deep, but was not unfamiliar. In town she had heard the whispers already. The widow too quick to find man, too proud to scrub floors. Each word was another nail sealing her out of the world. She walked back through the gate, the lamp's glow fading behind her. Yet as she left, she thought she heard a small voice inside the house say, "Papa." She looked hungry. The next day brought rain. It came sudden and hard, drumming the earth, turning the road to mud. Eliza walked again, soaked through, clutching a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She had baked it that morning in the town's communal oven, saving a piece of her own flour for the offering. When she reached the Boone ranch, her hair clung in damp curls to her cheeks, her dress heavy with water. Caleb opened the door once more, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her. "I told you yesterday," he began, but she held out the bread, her hands trembling. "I can cook," she said softly. "Let me show you." Hunger and fatigue bent her voice toward pleading, but there was steel beneath it. Something in her defiance must have struck him, for he did not shut the door. Instead, he stepped back silent. She entered, the warmth of the hearth wrapping around her like a memory. That evening she cooked stew from what little she found in his pantry. Beans, carrots, a cut of salt pork, and set cornbread on the table beside it. Caleb sat silent, his broad hands folded, his eyes studying her as though searching for the trick beneath her offering. Clara, though, ate with a joy so bright it startled the room. Her laughter rang once, quick and birdlike, before she caught herself, glancing at her father's stern face. Eliza smiled gently, and the child's shoulders eased. It was a sound Caleb had not heard in too long. After supper, as the storm rattled the windows, Caleb told Clara it was time for bed. She rose reluctantly, her eyes lingering on Eliza, then In a voice as soft as falling rain, she asked, "Can she tuck me in too?" The words silenced the room. Caleb looked at his daughter, stunned, then at Eliza, his expression unreadable. Eliza's breath caught, her heart tightening with something she dared not name. She nodded, following Clara to the small bedroom. She sat by the girl's bed, humming a lullaby her own mother once sang, and watched Clara's eyes drift closed. For a moment, the world felt still, as though sorrow itself had bent to rest. But peace is fragile. In town, the sight of Eliza at Caleb's ranch did not go unnoticed. Gossip spread like wildfire in dry grass. "The widow wastes no time," muttered one shopkeeper. "Boone's too lonely to see he's being used," sneered another. Caleb bore it in silence, but the words cut him deeper than fists. Eliza heard them too, felt them crawl across her skin, but she kept on, her hands busy with mending clothes, feeding chickens, tending Clara with quiet grace. She brought flowers from the roadside, placing them in a chipped jar on the table. She taught Clara how to braid her hair. She never asked for more than her keep, yet still the whispers grew. The breaking point came one evening when Caleb went into town for supplies. At the saloon, half-drunk cowhands jeered, their voices loud enough for all to hear. "Boone can't keep house without a widow filling it," one laughed. Another added, "What else is she keeping warm for him?" The words struck like fists, and when one man shoved him, Caleb's restraint snapped. Fists flew, chairs toppled, glass shattered. He left bruised, his pride shredded by laughter that followed him into the night. That same night, vengeance came. A group of those same men, fueled by spite more than whiskey, rode out to his ranch. Under cover of darkness, they set fire to the haystack, the flames leaping high, their laughter sharp against crackle. Clara woke screaming, her small voice cutting through the smoke. Caleb rushed out, cursing, hauling buckets from the trough. Eliza was beside him before he could speak, her skirts clinging, her hands blistering as she beat the flames with wet cloth. The fire roared, the night alive with heat and chaos, but together they fought it, their movements desperate and raw. Smoke burned their lungs, sparks scorched their skin, yet neither faltered. Clara's cries spurred them on, a reminder of what was at stake. At last the flames gave way, leaving only smoldering ash, the air thick with the stench of ruin. Caleb staggered, his chest heaving, sweat and such streaking his face. He turned to Eliza, who stood with her hands red and raw, her hair singed, her eyes fierce even through exhaustion. In that moment, he saw not a widow seeking shelter, not a burden, but a partner forged in fire. Their gazes met, and something unspoken passed between them, as steady and undeniable as the earth beneath their feet. Dawn brought townsfolk, drawn by the smoke. They gathered in the yard, faces hungry for spectacle. The sheriff stepped forward, his voice carrying the judgment of the crowd. "This can't go on, Boone. You bring trouble on yourself. Send her back before worse comes." Murmurs rippled, sharp as knives. Eliza stood trembling, her blistered hands clenched, but her chin lifted. Her voice, though quiet, carried more strength than the crowd's noise. "I came with nothing but bread and hands willing to work. If you see shame here, it is not mine to bear." Her words stilled the air, hanging like a challenge none could answer. Caleb stepped beside her, his voice low but steady. "She belongs here. She saved what we could not. She gave my child back her laughter. That's worth more than your gossip." His hand brushed hers, not a claim, not a vow, just a quiet act of standing together. Clara slipped her small hand into Eliza's as well, and the three of them stood before the crowd. A picture not of scandal but of survival. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. The sheriff looked away, muttered something about order, and turned back to town. One by one, the others followed, their whispers faltering. When the yard emptied, the only sound was a hiss of cooling ash. Caleb exhaled, his shoulders easing for the first time in years. Eliza looked at him, her eyes wet but steady, and he saw not just a woman who had asked for work, but a soul as weary and resilient as his own. Clara leaned against Eliza's side, her trust complete. The fire had taken much, but it had left something too, a bond stronger than shame, forged in struggle, tempered by kindness. That night, as stars spread across the sky, the house glowed with the quiet light of the hearth. Eliza mended her burned hands with cloth. Caleb sat silent, and Clara slept with peace on her face. Outside, the land lay scarred but enduring. Inside, a secret warmth had taken root. Not scandal, not pity, but the first fragile shape of belonging. And though none of them spoke it, all felt the truth. Sometimes what the world calls shame is only grace in disguise, and sometimes the smallest request of a child becomes a question that binds lives together.